Who has created the seven heavens, one above another? You see no fault in the creation of the most beneficent. Then look again. Do you see any rifts? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is challenging human beings to look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he asks you, do you see any faults? Do you see any inconsistencies? Do you see any gaps in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then again in the following ayah, in Surah Al-Mulk, he goes from ayah 3 to 4. He says, then look again, and yet again your sight will return to you in a state of humiliation and worn out every single time you look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to try to challenge the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the regularity of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the consistency of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to function, allows us to exist. If there was no regularity in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we could not study it. And thereby, we could not ascertain patterns in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There would be no such thing as science if there was not a consistency in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so one would say, well, what about death? What about destruction? What about pandemics? Part of the consistency of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that everything has a beginning and everything has an end. Because we look at things in a very simplistic way. We would say that the best and most reliable cars that are coming off the production line are the ones that are made consistently. So if they're made consistently, all the parts will fit. We know what to expect. We know that the tires will fit. We know that the alternator for all the same vehicles is going to be the same. There's going to be that level of consistency. We know they should be consistent in passing safety regulations. And so we look at it in a very, very simplistic way. But again, we don't look at it sometimes in a complete way, because those cars have a beginning. Those cars have an end. Those cars aren't flawless. Even though they pass a safety inspection, there may be a recall. And so what we have to appreciate is that trials and tribulations, a beginning and end, death and destruction are a reality of creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us in Surah Al-Mu'minun, ayah 30, when he talks about the flood that occurred to the people of Nuh alayhi salam, he says, they are indeed signs for people of understanding. For sure, we are always putting people to the test. We are always testing people. So this is a consistency. This is a reality. This is a consistent reality of creation. Because it would be inconsistent if Allah would let some people live forever and others would have a beginning and end. Or others would have, everyone needs to have a beginning, but he would let others maybe live forever. And he would have some people that, they would die. Or you have nations that would be untouched with calamity. And if we recall the previous podcast, the brother, the Sheikh, he was mentioning how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he likes to see his attributes in the creation. Obviously, it's not on the same level, but we see a humanized version of those attributes. So if Ibn al-Qayyim says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is compassionate and he loves those who are compassionate. He is merciful to his servants, and he shows compassion to them. So he wants his servants to be merciful and compassionate to one another. This is a praiseworthy trait. And if we look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the consistency in what Allah has created for us to even exist, we realize that consistency is a praiseworthy trait. We realize that consistency in our character, being steadfast, being patient upon the truth, is something that is praiseworthy, is something that we should all strive and struggle to attain. And this is why the hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he states that the most beloved actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones that are done consistently, even though they are small. They are the ones that are done consistently, even though they are small, because then what does that mean? What does that mean? That means you do things based on principle. That means you do things based upon the truth. That means you do things based on what is just and not necessarily on your emotional state. Because your emotional state can fluctuate very, very easily. It's very easy for your emotions, even within a day, within an hour, to fluctuate, to go from happiness to sadness, to laughter, to joy. You can see those emotions sometimes when people watch a movie. They go through this emotional roller coaster. So if we base our actions purely on emotion, then we are not being just to ourselves. We are not necessarily being just to others. If we are doing things based on emotion, then it doesn't mean necessarily that we are doing things based on the truth or principle. It may coincide with that. And that's why they say that a broken clock is right at least twice in a day. So it can coincide with that, right? So you could do something emotionally. You're feeling a lot of compassion towards your fellow human being. Let me be giving to them. Let me give them a face mask. Let me sanitize myself. Let me do social distancing. Let me see if my neighbor needs something, because I'm feeling very compassionate at that moment. I'm feeling very, very merciful at that moment. But then maybe when you're touched with some stress and anxiety, when you're touched with some selfishness, can you be consistent with your good deeds? Can you be consistent? For a Muslim to be truly successful, it demands that you are consistent upon the truth. Your salah isn't 3 times a day one day, 4 times a day the next day, 0 the other day. It's commanded upon you to do salah 5 times a day. To be consistent upon the salah 5 times a day. It's required that you're consistent upon not associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are commanded to not oppress people, not occasionally, but consistently. And so we find ourselves right now within this pandemic, we find ourselves in a stage where we're trying to be consistent with social distancing, with many measures. We're trying to be consistent upon acting collectively to benefit the collective. So not acting individually, but acting collectively, okay, thinking about the collective. And so there is a pull, there is a temptation, there's an emotional pull, because everybody's situation is different. Some people during this pandemic, this lockdown, they're losing more money than others. Others are itching to get going. Their businesses are suffering. So everybody is on a different stage. But can we be consistent on this at this time, at this juncture, for not ourselves, not for our emotional needs, but for something that we can principally say is important, that we can go to the truth and say that being compassionate to others, being merciful to others, being just to others is something that we should do consistently. Because guess what? Part of the consistency of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is He is always putting us to the test. And our test at this point in the pandemic will be different than our test yesterday. And our test yesterday will be different than the test that we'll be facing tomorrow. But that's just as consistent as the test itself, that we will be put within a test, but the consistency is that test will be different for everyone at different time periods.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.